contact pages are probably one of the least worked on pages on a website, but everybody builds one. They put a form on every page and then they have a contact page. And like you said, if someone goes to that contact page and all they see is, Google Map embed, 4 addresses, and then what happens when you submit the form? Thank you for filling out our form. And that's usually all they say. What's the turnaround? When can I expect a response from you? 4 hours, 24 hours, 10 days? Let's also think about how many times contact forms don't work.
Welcome back to Content Logistics. I'm your host, Baylee Gunnell, and today we are digging into a topic that every B2B marketer can relate to: building a content strategy when your budget feels like the spare change in a couch cushion. We are all feeling it right now. Budgets are decreasing and lots of changes are getting made to content. Entire content teams are getting replaced by AI. However, the fact still remains that content is so important for businesses. Today, I am joined by Melissa Popp. She is a content marketing strategist with over 20 years of experience and has a current role as a content director at RicketyRoo, and she's also a content freelancer. She is the queen of scrappy ROI-driven strategies, and she knows how to make a limited budget work hard for clients and how to prioritize what actually moves the needle for clients. In this episode, we are going to talk through some strategies to make a content plan work within a limited budget, and also some really helpful talk tracks of how to explain to clients what they can expect with a limited budget and how to make those strategies work. So let's go ahead and get into it. Melissa, it's so good to have you on the show today. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm really excited about our topic, making content when you have budget constraints. So I wanted to start by digging into this challenge. First, budget constraints. What are some of the who are some of the types of companies that might need to take an approach, maybe when they're just getting started with content, of working within these budget constraints?
Yeah, I think there's a wide range of kind of companies, niches, and businesses that immediately run into those issues. I primarily work with small and medium-sized businesses that, every marketing dollar they're spending is critical. It has to go to some sort of goal tied to revenue, lead generation, or whatnot. And a lot of those businesses already they don't have enough marketing budget or budget in general for anything they're doing. So you kind of have one based on kind of the size of the business. And, you talked about just getting started with content. You have a couple different ways businesses do that. One is literally, I've worked with businesses that, it's like day one for them. They're like, I'm going to start a business. I want to try to do this. And it's almost like they're playing catch up. And so you have a budget constraint there too, because it's like, when you're playing catch up against people who've been around much longer, might have more marketing spend, it's like, how much can you throw at that without ruining other areas of your business where you might need that money just getting started out? And then I feel like you have this third set of businesses that have decided, okay, we're all in on marketing. Maybe they haven't done a lot of marketing in the past. Maybe they've tried things that don't work. Maybe they've just invested in PPC and paid advertising. And they're like, okay, let's try something new. And once again, they're trying to play catch up to everybody else they're competing against who may have been spending for much longer, and from the content perspective has so much more on their websites, their social media, through email, that they're playing catch up there. So I think it's hard to bucket exactly where the budget constraints are, because it really is, where is the business at? Have they spent marketing dollars already? Have they spent the right marketing dollars? And so I think it really goes business to business and what that situation is.
What would be your suggestion to these companies if they have a limited budget? So they only have so many marketing dollars, which I think every company is facing, especially right now. We've noticed a lot of people are needing to trim down their teams, and budgets are definitely getting tighter, which is everything going on. I think both of us were probably biased. Content is so super important.
Absolutely.
This is definitely something I would include in the budget, but if you were maybe supposed to provide some suggestions, maybe how would you suggest they break down that budget?
Well, I know everybody's going to crucify me for saying this. So as much as content is absolutely, without a doubt, the foundation and most important part of any type of marketing you're doing, whether it's organic, whether it's advertising, email, even clients I've worked with who are doing print and TV and radio ads, most important part. But the reality is if you don't have money to spend, you have to find ways around being able to create that content. And so sometimes, this is where I'm going to get crucified. Sometimes you have to step back, look holistically at your entire marketing strategy and decide, you know what, we're going to go in here for now. So maybe, a business just getting started out is going to start with paid advertising because we know that can drive leads right away. Now, yes, we're going to create ad copy and that, that's where the content comes into play. But when you start looking at creating blog posts, building out funnels on your website, improving those service and landing pages, depending on that budget, you might have to pivot where that content creation is actually starting from. And so in a case of a small business, it might be paid advertising. In a larger business, it might be building funnels, building the content behind it. So I really feel like you have to step back and say, okay, what's the most important marketing we could be doing that could drive revenue to us? And once we get more revenue, then we can start going, okay, what does our content strategy actually look like overall and not just in one or two channels while we're building that revenue to reinvest in our marketing elsewhere. So nobody come at me for that. But it's the reality when you're working with small budgets. Every dollar has to have an impact and you can't do everything.
Yeah. I love that hot take, and I feel like I maybe set you up a little bit with that question because every company is different, obviously. You can't do the same strategy for every single company, and especially like some of the startups that I work with, they just need clients really fast early on. They need to show that they can get clients and revenue, and content sometimes it's not a super fast return. There is definitely a return on investment, but you're not going to probably see a new client the next day. Whereas if you're turning on paid media, you can see a return a lot faster because you're getting a lot of eyeballs on your content and you don't have to worry about the algorithms showing your content to people. So I do appreciate that, even if we are content people. We love content.
Oh, we do. I mean, throw your money at me. I will make the best content you need, whatever channel you need. But yeah, and I think you touched on something else there too, where when you look at the ROI of content marketing in general, it's much, much longer unless you have the budget to distribute it, right? And most companies that we work with, again, they have to pick and choose where they're spending that money. And I think people think that, okay, you create a blog post, you create something about your funnel, and it's going to be magic, and all of a sudden they're going to have leads come in. And then, that's not quite how that works. Long term, yes, it will lead to that. But most of these businesses that have budget issues and don't have the money to spend, they don't have that time to wait. Even on the SEO side, you look at SEO results, it's the same thing. It's the scale of budget. So if you got to push a client into paid so that they can get the money to spend with you to create content, there's nothing wrong with that, but you got to show them this is how this works to get us to a place where we can spend more money to create the things that long term you're not going to have to maintain, update, and continuously fix to move the needle.
Yeah, I love your point talking about distribution, because I think sometimes we can fall into the trap of just making great content, but if it doesn't have a distribution strategy, then who's going to see it? And you're not going to get the results that you want. What are some just good distribution strategies that you like to recommend to your clients?
Well, distribution is probably sometimes almost more important than even the content we're creating. We don't want to create content and avoid and then forget about it, because then why are we spending that money to begin with? And I think it's something a lot of small businesses and clients, even bigger sometimes, forget the importance of that. And so I think the most important thing when distributing content is to understand where your audience is. There used to be a time where you would post everywhere: Facebook, X, Instagram, LinkedIn. You just literally would post the same picture, same content everywhere and hope for the best, right? and I don't think that ever worked for anybody, but let me know if it worked for you, because I would love to see that if it did.
Yeah.
I want to see what industry or niche that might be. But it's understanding where your audience is. So, I work with a lot of home services businesses. And, when you think of the demographic who need those businesses, a lot of times it does skew a little bit older, And so where are those target audiences, right? They're still using Facebook groups. They're still on Facebook posting their memes and all that sort of thing. And so that's where they live. So it's like, that's, your first distribution channel. That's where you should focus on. You're not going to try to get, if you're a plumbing business, go on LinkedIn and be like, hey, who needs some help with plumbing? That's not, the demographic for LinkedIn. And so it's understanding where your audience is. We've seen a lot of rise in user-generated content forums like Reddit, Quora. Quora still pops up in search results. It's like, where is your audience? Do they fit somewhere like there? And then once you understand that, then you can start creating content and distribute that way. And one of the things I like to tell people is once you understand your audience, you don't have to post every single day to reach them. This isn't something that has to take hours and hours. Again, if you're a much bigger company and have the money, of course, you can spend that time really getting into it. But, the reality is you can get a really, cheap platforms like Hootsuite, Buffer, and you can schedule out, you can teach someone on your team how to do this. And, just you're putting yourself out there and you're getting your name out there. And so I think for me, those are the kind of two biggest points of distribution just to get started. Of course, there's hundreds of other things you could be doing, but when it comes to budget, it's know your audience and just start distributing. It doesn't have to be every day.
Yeah, I completely agree. There are so many tools that make this so much easier now. And I am a huge fan of repurposing content. You can say the same, like if you have one blog post, for example, it's a really great blog post. You can post about that blog post like 30 plus times just in different ways. Make a carousel, add an image, maybe just a text post. There's so many different ways you can just share content from that blog post.
Definitely. And like even with AI, ChatGPT, and I mean, even just this image update that ChatGPT just had within the last couple of days, I mean, I've been playing around with creating memes and like probably the dumbest stuff ever. I haven't even played around with it of repurposing content visually yet. I haven't even gotten that far because I'm just having fun doing dumb stuff with it. Yep. And that's my favorite use case of AI right now is let's do some dumb stuff with it, learn from that, and then try the marketing aspect. But $20 a month you spend for ChatGPT as a company that maybe, let's say you're not spending money on marketing, you're trying to do it all yourself. You have a tool here that once you learn how to use it, you take that one piece of content and go in and say, hey, you know what? Can you create me, 10 Facebook posts about this one piece of content? I want to reach out to my professional network on LinkedIn. How do we repurpose this, for a LinkedIn post, right? So we already have even AI tools, that you can go in and learn yourself to help you figure out how to do some of this stuff. And I think that's actually incredible for businesses that are struggling with budget because, you get someone on your team, especially some of the younger kids who are coming into businesses, that are excited by technology and want to dive into this sort of stuff. And like the creativity they can come up with it and help make it easier to distribute. I think the possibilities there are just going to be like endless.
Yeah, I completely agree. ChatGPT just got so much more fun.
It did.
Yeah, that image tool is so cool. I have a niece just graduating high school this year, and she's just trying to figure out what to do with her life and all that fun stuff when you're 18 years old.
Oh yeah.
And she asked me like, what should I do? And I'm like, well, I don't know if I could tell you what to do, but I can tell you need to learn how to use AI.
Yep.
Because if you know how to use AI, I think it's gonna just, well, at this point, I feel like everyone needs to use AI. If you don't know how to use AI, you're not going to be able to market yourself for a job. But yeah, it's just amazing, all the stuff you can do there.
It really is.
So let's talk just a little bit of budget. In a scenario, you have maybe someone reach out to you, they want to start doing more content. Is there maybe like a minimum amount to be effective with content that you would say?
I think that's a really hard, I feel like everything in marketing is really hard questions to answer sometimes, or your general, it depends. I think the reality is that when it comes to content, it's not so much a minimum of budget, but it's how quickly do you want to get off the ground? And, I work with clients both at RicketyRoo, at our agency, and I have a whole side hustle that I participate in as well. And I see a variety of budgets, anywhere from $1,000 a month to $50, $60, $70,000 a month for that. And my philosophy is that even with $1,000, we can find a way to make content impactful. And it starts with what is the end goal of why we're creating content, and it's not just, for organic rankings and growing that. It's not just for lead generation. It's like, why are we creating this single piece of content? We want to make, whether it's $1,000 budget or we have a $60,000 budget, each piece of content along the way has to be immediately impactful in one way or another. It might be we're using this to improve organic rankings on the SEO side. It could be this is the landing page we're going to use to convert for PPC ads. And it could, be something, we have people ask us the same darn question every single time. We're tired of answering it. Let's create this. And what does that do? Give you time back from answering that question. So, every person who creates content out there, whether it's an agency or it's a freelancer, everybody sets their own rates, right? And there's a spectrum of rates that you might then take and say, okay, well, you have $1,000 budget. I charge $500 a piece per content. So we can write you 2 pieces of content a month, right? That's simplifying it. And any writers out there, please charge more. Like, you're worth it, charge more, okay? Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Don't get in that trap. But, so that's also part of it too, that as the person doing the content, you also have what your kind of skill is of how you make your money, right? And same thing on the agency side. You're taking those dollars, marking it up a bit so that you have a margin. So I think really, instead of approaching it of this should be the minimum that you should spend, you want to tie those pieces of content to what the overall goal of why you're working with that client. And then it's up to you to go to them and say, okay, look, you can only spend $1,000 a month. We still need to create content, but also do X, Y, Z for your marketing. What if we were able to spend even $500 more, $1,000 more? It doesn't have to necessarily be $10,000, but you have to show them that by being able to create more, they're getting more of a benefit. And by building that trust, then you kind of open up and you have more of an ability to create the content that's needed by still prioritizing the impact of it. So yeah, I think it's very tough. Obviously we would all want clients who come in with a $50,000, $60,000 budget. Yeah. It would make all of our lives so much easier and they would be so ecstatic by the results they get with it. But really, I think we have to step back as marketers and say, okay, not everybody's going to be able to spend that amount of money. How do we get the most bang for that buck? And it may not necessarily start with being able to do X amount of pieces of content. It might the reality might be, okay, you can create 1 piece of content a month. So how do you get the most out of that and everything else you need to do to support that?
Yeah, with small budgets, it definitely forces us to be a lot more strategic with the way we approach content. And like you said, we'd all love huge budgets for everything.
Give them to us.
Yeah, we do, but that's just not the reality all the time. And it definitely forces us to be strategic. Like, we have a client who's asking us for help with SEO. And initially when we talked, they had come with us saying, yeah, we just want to make more blog posts. And we took a look at what's going on. One thing you mentioned to us is reverse engineering the funnel, which I want to get into with you too. But we just took a look at their website and we're like, I think it'd probably be better for us to rework some web pages and make sure you're getting clients before we actually start making blog posts. And we'll get to that eventually, making more blog posts, but really we got to fix the bigger problem, which is making sure the funnel is set up correctly on their website.
Yeah, and to touch on that a little bit, I think unfortunately in our industry, especially on the SEO side, there were so many years where you really could just post 100 things on a website and it would rank so easily. You'd go, you'd buy backlinks to it back when you still did that, and like you would rise to the top and it worked. You could just throw as much content on the wall and it worked. And at some point in the industry over the last 10, 15 years, we cared way more about quantity than quality because, for a lot of the work that we do, there's not something tangible the client can necessarily see as a deliverable. You go and update on page on a website and, you can show them you updated a title tag and a meta description and, but that's not really sexy at all. It's not something that they can read through and really, but you create a piece of content and they can see that, it's like it's like something shiny in front of them. And I think at some point we spent so much time creating content that that's now what people expect as part of their SEO experience. And yes, content's important, but yeah, it's like there's so many other facets of that help. It's, yeah, what do you already have on your website? What's working? What's not? What can we update? And sometimes those updates, you take an hour and you can pop something from page 2 or 3 to page 1 just by updating the on page and the body text. But we don't spend a lot of time doing that because, again, it's like, to clients, that isn't sexy to them.
Yeah.
And they don't feel like they're getting the most for their dollar. And I think that's where, this is where education comes into play, where we have to explain and walk through, this is why we're doing this. This is the importance of this. Here's past results showing how this works. And, I think it's just, as an industry, we have to continue to encourage that of, okay, we don't always have to create new content just because we're creating new content. It's like, what can we already improve that brings leads in much quicker than the lifetime value of a new piece of content that it's, maybe not the best choice of budget.
Yeah, you're totally right. It is not the sexiest thing just to update pages, unless maybe you're doing a full redesign, which is something I really love to do. Sometimes it just needs a little freshened up design. But it is usually the fastest way to get results. Like, it's way easier to jump up a few page rankings than it is to post a brand new piece of content and show up immediately. Great. Okay, let's hop into a little bit more of this reverse engineering the funnel. So this is something we had talked about previously, but I would love if you could just walk through what this would look like in practice.
Yeah, so anybody who knows me knows that funnel optimization is my bread and butter. It's my favorite thing to do. I have figured out how to do this for the smallest clients that you would think, holy cow, does a funnel really matter for them, to big e-com clients that I've worked with in different niches over the years. I think it's one of the most undervalued and understated ways to boost all your marketing, not just organic. And it's something that, isn't really addressed or strategized by most SEO agencies, or even, and in some cases, some content marketing agencies also out there don't necessarily focus on it. And so one of the things I like to look at is this concept of reverse engineering a funnel. A lot of people, when they create a funnel, they are looking, they're looking at creating something new. They're looking at creating something exciting from the get-go, right out of the box, that gets their client just, yeah, let's do this. Let's spend the money. Let's go. And again, to bring back to what we just talked about, it's like they're already forgetting about what already exists on the website, what foundation is already there. Because 9 out of 10 times when we work with clients, they have plenty of top and bottom of the funnel content. You have your landing pages, which would be your bottom. You have your informational blog posts and articles, that would be your top. All those long tail keywords that SEOs love to go after, that hit in that top of the funnel. And so you already probably have a foundation of content that could be building funnels. So what I like to do is I like to start at the bottom. And I like to say, okay, this is, what do we have as far as the landing page where we want that traffic to 100% convert when they land? So what does that look like? Is it good content? Are the call to action solid? Have we convinced to make a sell? That's probably 50-50 for most clients out there. We got to improve and work on that. So I always like to start on that bottom of the funnel piece first. And I like to improve the content on it. Make sure we're targeting the right search intent, solid keywords on it, so that the SEO can help boost that, right? But then it's, how do we re-engineer this page now that we're starting at the bottom? And so from there, it's like you get that all updated, and then it's, okay, the gap's usually in the middle. Most companies don't ever build middle of the funnel content, and if they do, it's strictly for link building purposes. It's not actually for the funnel. It's like, what infographic comparison can we do that we can then go out and try to earn links for, right? And so you're not even tackling that middle of the funnel content correctly, because your focus more is on earning links than it is on actually convincing people in that stage to move to the bottom. So then I'm working on the middle. What do we need to do to show that this company is the best of the best at what they offer, whether it's a service or product, is better than what's already out there? How do we then guide them from there, if they're on the fence, to that bottom?
Yeah, and then this is super. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead. Yeah,
I want to get more into each of these phases because this is really interesting. So let's maybe go back to the bottom of the funnel a little bit more. So let's say, I mean, a super common call to action I see all the time is like contact us or schedule a demo. Those are the ones probably I see the most often. What are your thoughts on that? Like, how would you maybe improve these offers, or would you maybe add in a secondary offer that's a bit more enticing? But what would your process to improve that?
So, call to actions are boring. 80% of the call to actions we see anywhere on the web, no matter what we're looking for, it could be buying groceries, it could be buying beauty products, it could be buying a house, are boring. It's buy this, call us, schedule this. I mean, sometimes you just schedule things online now and you don't even call and talk to anybody anymore, which I'm a fan of. I don't like picking up the phone. So like, I'm good with that. But the reality is your call to actions need to be geared towards your audience. And I'd say most businesses, talking about those demographics, it's like, do they actually know who their target audience is? Because, if we go all the way back to the idea of building a funnel, you want to look at your buyer personas and your audience and target research data, and you should be building content in a funnel strictly to that and not necessarily a catch-all. But most content that's called funnel content out there now is very much built to a generic catch-all, every type of audience. So those call to actions that are generic at the end there, your call us, schedule, book, whatever it might be, fill out this form, that's very generic. And yeah, I mean, that's going to work for a whole bunch of people for sure, but if you're actually targeting your actual audience, you have age ranges, it's like we know 18 to 24-year-olds right now, men and women, love instant video content. So YouTube Shorts, TikToks, Instagram Reels, this is where they're consuming a lot of media. And we've seen, companies like Temu, no matter what you think of their products, skyrocketed because that's who they marketed to with video. And so, with your call to actions, Temu figured out, okay, this is where our audience is. They want boom, boom, boom in their face, buy, buy, buy. And they figured out those call to actions. And so the same thing has to apply no matter what your niche is. It's who do you want to spend money with you? And your call to action should be geared to that. So for instance, if you're a fashion website and you're targeting 18 to 24-year-old, let's say women, it's like you want to convince them that they need that skirt, that halter top, whatever they might be wearing, what they landed on, they got to buy that now because they've got a hot date that night. They've got an event they're going out to. They're going out to the club. Like, you have to create a sense of urgency with those call to actions. So just saying, oh, buy this now. I mean, unless they really like it, they might be like, oh, let me go look somewhere else. Maybe I need to go in a store, so you have to be able to build those call to actions to your audience. And I think that's something that's sorely lacking across the board, small or big budgets, when it comes to bottom of the funnel content.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time too, I see like really fuzzy call to actions. So if I go to like a contact page, they have like their business address and their corporate, like they'll have 4 different addresses on there. And I'm like, first off, I don't care where you're located. I just want to know why to reach out, like why I should reach out. And also, I think the other thing I see a lot is what's going to happen after I fill out this form. Like, it is the price to pay. Like, I think a lot of people don't like to put their contact information because they're worried they're going to get spammed. I want to be reassured that I'm not going to get added to some mailing list and I'm going to get a billion emails. Like, I just want to get in touch with someone about the next steps.
Oh, yeah. And, contact pages are probably one of the least worked on pages on a website, and it's, but everybody builds one. Like they put a form on every page and then they have a contact page. And like you said, it's, if someone goes to that contact page and all they see is, Google map embed, 4 addresses. And then what happens when you submit the form? Thank you for filling out our form. And that's usually all they say. It's what's the turnaround? When can I expect a response from you? 4 hours, 24 hours, 10 days? And so you don't even know if, and I mean, let's also think about like how many times contact forms don't work for a client's website and something, so it's, if you're going to hear from a company and they say, okay, we have a turnaround time of 24 hours and you don't hear from them, you might be willing to reach back out if they tell you that's the window. And so even contact forms, while they might not be necessarily the bottom of the funnel type content, I mean, they're just as neglected when it comes to call to actions and information to build trust when you fill that form out as well. And so they get neglected too.
Yeah. I think on that note too, we need to follow up with those people. Sometimes I see some companies like wait a whole week to reach out to people.
I know.
And I'm like, they're not going to remember you, or they're going to just lose all trust that you're a reliable
They've moved
company.
on. Yeah, they've moved on to the next vendor that could help them, and, we can drive, as marketers, we can drive as much traffic and leads to a website as we can, but that's where our job stops. If a client can't take that lead and convert it or even disqualify it as a lead in a timely manner, we often get blamed for that somehow. And it's like your customer service starts the moment someone lands on your website and what it looks like, what it feels like, what the copy is, through when you pick up the phone or contact them after they contact you. And so like that process goes from beginning to end, and sometimes clients forget that.
Yeah. And I like your point. It's okay to disqualify it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of spam, definitely, that comes in.
Yeah, or people can't afford your services. It happens. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with that. It's working if you're driving people there, absolutely. But then you can then retarget that and figure out, okay, how do we rework our content, our call to actions to get ourselves in that price demographic that we need for our services for that business to grow.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to add just to this bottom of funnel piece before we move on to back to middle of funnel?
I mean, bottom of the funnel is probably the most important content you're ever going to create on your website. If you can get someone through your website to that content and convert, you're solid. And so that, to me, that bottom of the funnel content, that is where you should honestly be spending the most amount of time of page design, layout, your UX experience, beyond just the words on the page.
Yeah, I completely agree. The bottom of funnel is very, very important. You're going to waste a lot of time if you're creating top of funnel content and you don't have anywhere to direct them to.
Exactly.
The next step. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, let's hop on to back to middle of funnel then. We were already talking about a bunch of things, but what are your suggestions? I think there is definitely a lot of confusion of what is defined as middle of funnel content, but how would you define that?
So I agree with you. I think there's a lot of misconception of middle of funnel content. There we go, out there. And I think it's the least created content out there because both marketers seem to think that it's hard content to create to fill the gaps. And clients are like, why would we create something in the middle? Let's just get them to the bottom. So, for middle of the funnel content, basically this is going to be anything that's kind of taking you from the top of the funnel to the bottom of the funnel, and it fills that gap in between. And sometimes that gap can be very long depending on what your service is, what your product is, what you're selling is, especially when your price point goes up. So you look at someone buying a car, your middle of the funnel content is probably going to take people much longer to get from the top to the bottom because of the value that they have to invest in a new car. So it's one of those things that, depending on the niche, will determine kind of how much you need to fill that gap in the middle. But the idea is when you start at the top of the funnel and someone comes to the website, they're often only looking for an answer to a question in that case. It might be something that, it's like they notice a plumbing leak in their house and they're like, oh, can I fix this myself? That's where they start at the top, right? And they might be handy, they might fix other things around their house, but it's in the middle of the funnel where they start realizing, oh, maybe I shouldn't do this myself. Now that I understand the difference between me doing it myself and hiring a professional. So your middle of the funnel content in that way would be showing the differences of what could happen potentially between doing it yourself and hiring a professional. And then from there, now that you have the gears in their head turning of realizing, oh yeah, you know what, I'm handy, but what if I screw this up? You can then guide them into the bottom of the funnel where, yeah, this is why you call us. This is why you spend money with us. Because if you don't, you're going to end up spending more money to fix maybe a bigger problem because you messed something up. And so, that's kind of like a really simplified version of how this can work. But your middle of the funnel content really is continuing to share information that starts slowly diving into what your call to actions are going to be at the bottom of the funnel. But at the same time, giving those people in the middle the time to actually process and still think about the decision they need to make, but nudging them gently into that direction.
Yeah. I am a huge advocate for giving free advice, if that's the way to say it. Like, I think a lot of people are afraid to share how they do things because they're afraid people are going to steal it and that they won't have a need to hire you anymore.
Yeah.
But I just think if someone is scrappy enough to figure it out how to do it themselves, they probably weren't your ideal customer to begin with. But if you can show just like how much of an expert you are in that space and that you really know what you're doing, someone might try and they're like, ah, man, this is a lot harder than I thought it would be. And realize, yeah, they really do need an expert.
Oh, definitely. And I've absolutely worked with clients too who are very skittish about sharing information. And the way I approach that too very much is, look, that information is probably already out there. There's probably a YouTube video, there's probably a competitor that's talked about it, there's probably somebody on Reddit or somewhere that's talked about it and walked people through whatever it might be. And it's okay, so we have that content out there. You're an expert in this. How do we show that expertise? How do we show, that you know more than what's already out there? And in some cases you can do that. In some cases you can't. Because, it's like plunging a toilet, that's pretty much the same no matter what,
Yeah.
There's no magic or special proprietary something or other about plunging a toilet. But, you can find ways to talk about these subjects that then builds that trust both at the top of the funnel and the middle of the funnel. That makes it so much easier guiding those folks to the bottom of the funnel where they already trust you because you've shared that information. And so that's how I like to approach that objection with clients is this is how you build the trust. And, a lot of times before you used to do all of these interactions in person, before the internet, it's like a handshake was a promise. So now the content on your website becomes that promise. And so the more you can show what you know, your expertise, all of that, the more you're building that trust without a physical interaction with a potential client.
Yeah, you nailed it. There is so much content out there on YouTube and honestly just everywhere. Maybe 20 years ago, you could have gotten away with just gatekeeping everything and having this black box approach to what you're doing. I have a client that just recently put out this video about tariffs. And they're talking about, because they work with manufacturers, and it's just giving some really good advice on like how to navigate these times if you're working in manufacturing. And they gave some great advice, and if someone were to hire them, they would help a lot to navigate this. But just giving some really good advice for people who aren't even clients, I think is just a great way to help people out, because obviously this is a very sensitive topic that people are working through right now. And yeah, there's just a lot you can do to help clients and position yourself as an expert.
Absolutely. And one other thing on that too is like sometimes you just have to share information to share information, and it may not necessarily have an exact impact immediately on your marketing, on lead generation, but sometimes just putting stuff out there with the idea of genuinely helping people, especially as it ties into top of the funnel, like people can tell the difference between you genuinely sharing information to help people and something that was created for marketing purposes. And so I like to encourage clients and customers too, that it's, especially if they like video, like even if they're just creating their own and it's not like the most professional best thing out there, I'm like, yeah, if you have something to share, go for it. And just because we might not market it right this second doesn't mean we can't use it in some way, shape, or form down the line. But I think that also builds those genuine moments of connection and trust between you and your audience, where they can feel that trust, and it's not just something blindly they're reading on the internet.
Yeah, I think it's just easier now than ever to make content. I think most of us have smartphones. And those honestly have such good cameras.
Oh, I know.
You don't need to go buy anything fancy. Great. So once we've nailed down bottom of funnel, middle of funnel, what are your suggestions for like reverse engineering up to the top of the funnel content?
Yeah, I mean, top of the funnel content, you almost don't have to reverse engineer it necessarily, because it's like the easiest way to create content. And I'd say probably, the majority of content we see on the internet, whether it's for marketing purposes or not, would go into that informational bucket that the top of the funnel is there to, serve.
Yeah.
And so, to start with reverse engineering, we see what we have at the bottom of where we're sending people. What do we already have at the middle? And whether we have to update content at the middle or create new content to support the middle of the funnel, it's then there, okay, how do we take that middle of the funnel content and tie it to the top of what we should be creating there to filter it down? And that's a lot easier than starting at the bottom and working your way up. Because again, the top of the funnel, like I mean, you can close your eyes and create top of the funnel content for your client.
Yeah.
But the problem with top of the funnel content that causes the most issues is that's where a lot of us and a lot of our clients want to stick to, because they think long term that top of the funnel content is going to drive business their way. And that's not that. I mean, yeah, ideally every piece of content would drive leads and business. But the reality is, most people who are searching for information, they might not be aware that they have a problem or they need to buy something to solve something. They may not be aware that they need to pay for something. Like they're stuck. They don't even know they're in a buying decision pattern yet. They're just trying to find information, and so it's like when they land there, that's what they're getting. But at the same time, you have to subtly guide them to that next part of the funnel. And at the informational stage at the top, you have to be very careful, because if you push too hard, then they're like, oh, you're just trying to sell something to me. This is the only point of this content. I can't trust it. I'm going to move on. And so, instead of creating so much content at the top of the funnel, even though that's the easiest content to create, you have to be much more strategic in what you're creating and how you're slowly guiding people into the next phase. And I think that's a problem a lot of marketers run into because of that shiny new content syndrome that clients love. And it's now we got to spend a little bit more time here of like, how does this actually build into that sales funnel for the ultimate goal, which is to convert a lead.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, because that's what I wanted to talk about next, is a shiny object syndrome. I've noticed that a lot of top of funnel content is great to get website visitors.
Yep.
And sometimes that's just a vanity metric. People are like, wow, our traffic is up. This is great. And while I do getting more traffic, the goal is to get conversions and leads, like you were mentioning before. One thing I always find interesting is a lot of the time we notice that this traffic is actually coming from people trying to write like college essays or things like that. Yeah. They're like, wow, this content is so informational. It's going to help me write my essay, but it's not their target customer. People are just trying to get information.
Yeah, and I agree. Like, there's a lot of vanity metrics, I feel like, no matter what your marketing discipline is. And, it's like one of my favorite arguments almost to have with clients is, it's like you'll get an email at 2 a.m. because they're looking at their rankings on Google and they're like, oh my gosh, we're not number one for this keyword anymore. Oh my gosh, the sky is falling. You're terrible at your job. Why are we spending money with, they freak out. Yeah. And then you go and look at the keyword and it's a long tail informational keyword that, yes, they liked being number one for it. But then you go into GA4, you go into your analytics and you realize, oh, well, people are spending a lot of time on this page, but they're not going anywhere else on the site. They're writing their college essay, right? But the client is so determined to look at their success as rankings or traffic. And it's, yes, these are good things. They're good indicators that you're doing things correctly. But where does that traffic go? If 80% of the traffic to your website never makes it to the bottom of the funnel or even just to the contact page to even consider contacting you, what was the point of that traffic? Now, granted, it serves a different purpose. We know that traffic, there is a correlation to traffic, and statistically, you will get more people who will fill out and convert as leads the more traffic you get. We know that there's a correlation between traffic and organic rankings. One of the many, 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 many different ranking factors that we both know and don't know from Google and other search engines, but these things aren't necessarily explained to clients in a way that they understand that they're actually vanity metrics. And it's, okay, you lose number one keyword position on a near me query, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's sky's falling. Let's look into that. But, we spend so much time with clients who look, the shiny new objects also apply to vanity metrics. And it's, I love seeing traffic graphs go up. That's awesome. But if the goal with your client is to convert, what's the percentage of that traffic that's actually converting? And what's the lifetime value of that particular customer? Because if you're not connecting those dots, then you're not targeting the correct audience. And yeah, it's great if a college kid trusts your information enough that they can use that as a viable source. Absolutely. But that's not your goal there. You can feel nice about that and good about that, but that's not the goal there.
Yeah. One of these shiny new objects that I get people asking me all the time is the AI overviews in Google. They're like, how can we show up in these? And I'm like, well, I wouldn't make that your number one goal, first off, because we live in a world now where we have zero-click content.
Yep.
People are seeing those AI overviews and they're not clicking on anything. And usually the recommendation I give is, I'm like, the goal is we should increase our share of voice. We need to, rather than focusing on getting in as many AI overviews as possible, let's make sure we're showing up in all the things that your business is specializing in. So not just this one specific keyword, like what are all the solutions and problems that you can solve? Is that something you've noticed too with the AI overviews?
Oh yeah. I mean, we could have a whole other episode talking about how terrible AI overviews are and how it just seems that this is a feature. I truly believe, looking at the terrible results that have come through, I absolutely understand the technology of why it is happening, but why Google is okay with that, I don't have that answer. I have theories, but again, that could be a whole other episode of just talking about the downfall of Google and trusting search results. But I am starting to notice, in particular, informational content losing steam as far as traffic metrics and click-through rates because of AI overviews. Even with clients that I work with that are in those AI overviews, because again, the zero-click content, we know for a fact that Google wants to keep everything within their ecosystem and not have you click anymore, right? Because that's how they can earn ad revenue and generate their own growth. We know that, and I think, talking about share of voice, and even taking that a step further and talking about multi-channel marketing, because I don't think there's ever been a time that, because of AI overviews, and it's like Google owns the landscape as far as search goes, right? But they're older folks, still Bing is a very viable source. Microsoft is also dealing with issues of figuring out how to integrate Copilot results into their search. It's not happening as bad as it is with Google, but I assume all of these search engines are going to at some point, work on this, and you're more of that zero-click content. So, the problem is that's happening, and you're seeing this in the discourse online right now on LinkedIn and Twitter and elsewhere, is that people are angry that Google is taking something from them. Well, I've succeeded in organic for so long, and now it's taken away from me. And people forget, at the end of the day, Google is trying to make money for themselves. That's the whole point of capitalism, whether you like it or not. Yeah. And they never owed anybody a thing. So why are we still spending all of our time making Google happy? And AI overviews, I think, to me, is like the perfect proof of that almost overnight, when this rolled out everywhere, you saw those clicks go down, you saw impressions go down, you saw all of this tank. And that's on purpose. They want that. So why are we still spending all of our time in Google and working on organic, and I work for an SEO company. Trust me, this is where we make our money, right? As a company. But the reality is, we have to be encouraging clients, that they need to be looking at where is their audience, whether it's paid, social. I've worked with businesses that still do direct mail. I can't believe I know how to do direct mail campaigns, but I do, because their audience is still, that still works. So it's, what are we doing to encourage our clients that they need to be diversifying? Because look what's happening. If they're all in on search, and we've seen a lot of content creators lose their entire businesses overnight in the last 18 to 24 months because of the changes Google's making. And I genuinely feel that. I've had clients who've had to quit because of things like this, who lose money for this. But my question to them is, why did you think Google was the only place you needed to be?
Yep.
And why weren't you already working towards being elsewhere where your audience is, especially video right now? Like, why clients are not investing content in video, especially those short form? I don't understand that. You're seeing that content for everything. So that's really, to me, it's like, we need to be talking about content, not just from a perspective of what ranks in Google, but content as boosting all these different multi-channel marketing that clients could be doing.
Yeah, long gone are the days that you can rely on one channel
Yep.
to get your clients. The algorithms change, yeah, platforms change,
Yep.
audience preferences change. You can't just rely on one platform to get the message out about your company. And yeah, and also there's more that you already mentioned this, but Google isn't the only search engine.
No.
There's Bing, there's other ones out there, and
Yeah.
definitely use that to your advantage.
Absolutely. And like the work you're doing for Google's guidelines and Google's ranking factors, we know they're the most sophisticated. So the work you're already doing there works elsewhere. So go look at GA4, go look at your traffic sources. Do you have a lot of people coming from Bing? Maybe you need to start looking at what you look like on Bing, and the work you're doing is going to work for that too, but you might be missing out on a whole demographic that's who, that's where they're searching.
Yeah. I know like a lot of corporations too that use Outlook.
Yep.
You're not even allowed to use Google sometimes. You have
Yeah.
to use a different browser.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're using a Windows machine, unless you manually know how to change your search on that machine, you are using Bing when you're in your Windows search bar, and people don't realize that. And those count. That shows up in GA4 as a traffic source. So, and a lot of people don't realize that. They think they're still searching Google on a Windows machine, and no, you're actually using Bing. And that's why sometimes you look at the results and you're like, why is this so different than when I open Chrome? And
Yeah.
that's why.
Yeah. Things are changing so fast.
Oh, yeah.
We are coming up on time. So I want to finish off, unless you have anything else you want to add. I'll ask you my favorite question.
Oh, I could be here all day talking about all of this. I feel like we've scratched the surface on so many different things today.
I know. We started off talking about budget and we got into a lot of other things, and I'm loving these hot takes as well. So
It's fun. I love throwing
Yeah.
those hot takes out there.
yeah, super fun. So the question is, what is your biggest content marketing ick?
Oh gosh, this one gets me in trouble too. This won't be the first time I say this. So I loathe, it puts a fire under my skin, the term SEO content.
Okay.
I feel like I die a little bit inside every time I read or hear someone say SEO content, because to me, it's just content. It's not, the idea that we're still creating content strictly for SEO purposes, which, let's be real, that happens every day. That's probably not going to go away. But I hate how we diminish the importance of content as the foundation for all of our other marketing efforts by simply calling it SEO content. And I hope by the time I'm done in this industry, that's not what we're calling it anymore. But my gut tells me we still will. And I'll fight against it every day.
Yep. I got another hot take for you too. This is my hot take, is that most product pages or services pages shouldn't be optimized for a keyword. They should just be optimized for a user experience.
I will half that hot take with you, because I definitely, especially working in the local SEO field, if we didn't optimize those pages for keywords, our clients would never show up. And so I think it definitely, I can see in much larger companies like Amazon, right? They don't need to be keyword optimizing anything,
Yep.
that kind of thing. But I agree with you too, user experience, copywriting versus copy, content writing on those pages, all of that stuff. Absolutely 1,000% agree.
Yeah, there's definitely caveats to that.
Yeah.
There are definitely some exceptions, but I think user experience should take the priority.
Oh, user
over-
experience should
yeah.
probably always take the priority over anything else you're doing. That's a whole other
Yeah.
episode in battle.
Yeah, but let's stop calling it SEO content. Well, Melissa, thank you so much for joining me today. I enjoyed this conversation so much, but where can people go to learn more about you?
I am on Twitter, or X. I still call it Twitter. I would never call it X. You can find me there at Pop-Up Writer. I'm also on LinkedIn under my name. I'm pretty much kind of everywhere. If you find me, I'm also on Blue Sky. So feel free to reach out. And I love talking about content. I love connecting with people.
Great. Well, I'll include those links in the show notes so everyone can find you, but thanks again.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Content Logistics. Make sure to subscribe to the show so you don't miss the next episode. Bye!